Thanks for joining us on Mean Green Game Day. I'm your host, Michelle Brooks, and I'm joined today by analysts Justin Ballou, Jalen Jackson, and Connor Hibbett. We are so glad you guys are here. We're happy to be back in the studio. It's the first home game for UNT in a little bit over a month. It's week 7 of college football, and things are heating up. I'm excited, but let's jump back to last week, week 6. We took on SEC opponent Mizzou. We lost in a close game, closer than a lot of people expected. 48-35. We had an explosive second quarter. Now, how does UNT look after this game? I mean, I'm kind of excited, but also we talked earlier, and this is common of us. We play well and then not so much the next week.
Well, obviously the game goes in the loss column, but I thought there were some positives from this game. We scored 28 points in the second half alone, scored 35 points total against an SEC opponent. Just looking at the score alone, I think that's an accomplishment for us, just given how bad our offense has been throughout the course of the season. We also had some really big plays in both the running game and the pass game, which was always nice to see. The second week in a row that our offense has come out really strong in the second half, put up a ton of points in the second half. It was just unfortunate that the game wasn't really in question in either of the last 2 games by the time we were able to come back in the second half. I think it was just shades of our 2020 rush defense this game, with Missouri rushing for 314 yards as a team, over 8 yards a carry as a team. Their running back Tyler Beatty alone had 217 yards and a touchdown. He averaged 13 yards a carry, just hit some big plays on us. Defensively, we only had 1 sack, 1 pass breakup. So just a 2020-like performance from our defense. And you know, the last time on the show I talked about in the SMU game how it was just self-inflicted wounds that beat us. It was kind of the same story. We lost the turnover battle 4-0 in this game, 5-0 if you include a 4th down stop that Missouri had late in the game against us. You know, we can't have penalties against SEC teams. Had a lot of penalties in this game. We kind of fell behind early in the game, like we said, down 31-7 in halftime, and just weren't able to weather the storm enough with this offense. You know. We've now trailed by 24 or more points in the first half of our last 3 games. That is just a recipe for disaster against any team, especially when you play an SEC school. But I would like to credit the coaching staff a little bit for making second half adjustments because, again, second week in a row that the offense has come out looking very strong in the second half. Whatever they're telling these guys at the intermission break, tell them before the game.
So we dig ourselves in these holes, right? We do it game and game again, and then we come out and we have that explosive second quarter to dig ourselves out. In this game, it was led by Austin Aune. It was his first start of the season for UNT, for the Mean Green. He had 305 yards, 4 touchdowns in the second half alone, 3 of those in the third quarter. I'm excited about Austin Aune, but do we see him being this consistent again? Is he the new quarterback that UNT needs to lay their eyes on?
Well, you talked about us digging ourselves out of holes in the second half. The thing is, and I've noticed this with a lot of college football and college basketball, a lot of college teams, regardless of the sport, a lot of college athletes are 18 to 22 years old. Majority of them are. You have to keep in mind, when a team has a big lead, it seems like they'll kind of give it up a little bit, and then they'll put their finishing stamp on the game later in the game. That's what Missouri did with the pick 6 or with the fumble return for a touchdown. So I think sometimes when a team comes back and you're like, oh my gosh, we're looking so much better, it's also a score indication of how the game went in the first half, and the other team is a little bit lackadaisical. They're not as focused as they were. And that's what we've seen with all of UNT's games. They outscore their opponents in the second half because they're already so far behind. That's just a college athlete living up to that age expectations, to be honest with you. It's not mentally 100% consistent. And I'm not putting anyone down. That's just what 18 to 22-year-olds do. That's what I would do. It's hard to stay 100% focused on every single play. That's why Alabama is so much better than everyone else. Look what Nick Saban preaches all the time. You are never content. You keep on getting better. There's always something to improve on. I just want to bring this up real quickly because it has to do with the subject. 5 years ago, when Lane Kiffin called a jet sweep when they were beating Western Kentucky 45-3. They fumbled. Western Kentucky would go on to score they only had to go 20 yards to score a touchdown late in the game. Alabama won 45-10. But Nick Saban was talking about the few mistakes they made in the game, not the 99% of things that they did great. That's the attitude that you really have to have. You can't be content. And it feels like when teams are trying to come back, we saw this with Texas and Oklahoma last week. We'll talk about this later in the show. But that's what happened in that game, and unfortunately it caught up with Texas.
I think the score was kind of an indication as to why Austinani had the second half that he did. But nonetheless, an impressive performance, I think, from Austinani. Even if he was maybe playing against backups in the second half because they might have taken some of their starters out, I think it was still a pretty encouraging performance from him against an SEC school. All 4 of his touchdown passes were plays over 20 yards, including a 52-yarder to Roderick Burns and a 77-yarder to Damian Ward in that second half. This was actually the first time all season that a UNT quarterback has passed for more than 1 touchdown in the same game. So kind of a sad stat.
Okay,
there.
so I was going to pose the question, Jalen, are we improving as a team? But I can see we're improving as individuals. Does it feel like as a team, though, we're not coming together? Earlier this week in the post-game interview that Austinani had following Mizzou, he said, we have good culture, we just don't have chemistry. My question is, do we have good culture? There's been some things floating in the air this week. Wide receiver Deontay Simpson was arrested and dropped immediately from the team midweek. That's a big deal coming off this Mizzou loss and then going into this week, our third conference game of the season. How do we feel about the culture of this team? Do you guys think it's a coaching issue? Do you think we have a culture issue? Or do you think, like Ani said, we're just trying to find our chemistry?
I feel like it boils down to a little bit of everything. Coaching, it boils down to, what the players are around. Like, Seth Luttrell has been it's been questionable for him the last few weeks as the season has been going on. So I'm pretty sure, I remember personally from experience when I was in high school, we got a new head coach or we knew we were going to lose our head coach that we had. Everybody's mindset changed. So I believe it's more from that too. It's a little bit of everything. The players become a little, I would say, relaxed, and they kind of start just doing whatever they want. Everybody becomes their own player, and nobody's a team. So I feel like that's a major issue that needs to be fixed within the football program.
Right, and there has been speculation on Seth Luttrell and his position in this program. And Justin, we talked earlier about how we thought, okay, well, if we were going to lose him maybe mid-season, the chances are not anymore.
Right, because I think athletic director Ren Baker knew coming into the season how tough the season was going to be. In fact, Ren Baker was actually the one who organized for us to play all of these tough out-of-conference games. SMU isn't a team that we normally play every single season, but we played them this year again. Liberty's coming to town next weekend. We played Missouri. So Ren Baker, you can argue that he sort of set Seth Luttrell up for disaster this season. We knew it was going to be a losing season coming into the year. And, we kind of saw it as a rebuild year. I think the culture issues kind of come back to coaching because, we have a bunch of off-the-field stuff right now with just Coach Luttrell, not obviously in the same capacity as with Deontay Simpson, but players are distracted right now by the fact that their head coach is on the hot seat, maybe not making the quarterback decisions that they want. So that's just an extra distraction added into that room, and I think that's what kind of boils down to why we have culture issues is the coaching questions.
Look, college athletes already have to put up with enough adversity on the field, in the classroom. They don't need any extra stuff. And extra stuff, when you look across the country in any single year of college football, college basketball, you name the sport, when you have extra adversity off the field, when you hear about things that are not going too great in the locker room, there's a culture problem, those teams typically struggle, especially from a psyche standpoint. Week in, week out, they're not consistent because it's tough for these guys to put up with that extra adversity. And unfortunately, we're talking about non-football related issues right now, and that's not a positive thing.
And as far as it goes to how this impacts our team, I think the offense has been kind of hit or miss this season no matter what's going on off the field, but I think we are improving as a defense. We've taken a lot of big strides just statistically on the defensive side of the ball. We already have 9 takeaways this year, which was as many as we had all of last season. So, you would think that in these last few games we can get one more and one up that total from last year. Slight improvement in terms of yards per game allowed. Last season we were 127th out of 128 FBS schools in terms of yards allowed with 509. We've improved on that a little bit and knocked it down to 424 this year. So I think the defense overall has been improving. They've also lowered their points per game allowed from 41 down to 32 this season. So improvements on the defense, but I think the offense is just going to continue to be kind of in a hit or miss situation the rest of the season.
So we know Mizzou played a little bit differently offensively against us to get some different kind of reps in. So Connor, tell me, take your take. Connor on Connor. How do you feel about Mizzou right now? And
Well, Connor Bazelak is Mizzou's starting quarterback. He was projected to be one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC this season, definitely in the top half of the SEC. There's 14 teams, 14 starting quarterbacks. He was projected to be about 8th. I think he's played up to about that. But he didn't have a great game, but I don't think it has to do with him not living up to projections. Like you said, Missouri changed their game plan. Why? The previous week, Missouri played against Tennessee before they played UNT. Missouri, at home, I remind you, gave up 475 yards rushing to the Tennessee Volunteers, while Missouri at home had 75 yards rushing themselves. So I think Missouri, coming into the UNT game, had a mindset of, let's establish the line of scrimmage. This is UNT. They're a smaller group of 5 school. We know Connor Bazelak can do his thing, regardless of if his stats look great against UNT. We know what he's capable of. So let's try to prove something that we haven't proven to ourselves yet. Remember, they went into the UNT game last in rush defense in the country. That's 130 FBS schools. So I think they came in with a mindset, let's establish the line of scrimmage, let's live up to that SEC mentality and the SEC perspective of that SEC grind, the physical toughness. And they obviously did that. They contained DeAndre Torrey. He had about 80 yards rushing on 24 carries. And Missouri had over 300 yards rushing themselves. So I think it wasn't so much about, Connor's not living up to expectations. This is more about, like you said, this was the game plan for Missouri going into this game.
And I think the Tennessee-Missouri game impacted how they approached this game. I agree with you on that because I think you mentioned how they got just torched on the ground against Tennessee. I think they looked at the North Texas game as kind of a game where they can get back to their identity on offense and on defense. You mentioned Connor Bazelak. He came into this game 3rd in the entire nation in passing yards with over 1,500. He didn't even really have to throw the ball in this game. Like I said, they rushed the ball so well, especially in the first half that game was just kind of out of reach by the time it was halftime, 31-7. He didn't even need to throw the ball in the second half for them to be successful, but he did. And I think that was a little bit due to the fact that they have Texas A&M next week, and so they kind of saw us as that sandwich game, in a weaker defense to kind of get back to their identity and figure some things out on offense before they play A&M.
And that's another thing. That's why we had a little bit of a comeback in the second half. I think Missouri started looking ahead to Texas A&M.
No, and that's the thing, and that's what we're about to get into when we come back. We're going to dive into this SEC team and some more Texas teams that you have been watching all season long. Stay with us. Welcome back to Mean Green Game Day. I'm your host, Michelle Brooks. Now, we left off talking about Mizzou, SEC opponent that we took on last week and lost. Mizzou will face A&M this weekend. A&M is coming off a hot game against Alabama, a big game that some people were not expecting, obviously. Now, we had some questions earlier this season about Zach Calzada. Okay, they lost
Haynes King.
Yeah.
Haynes King earlier this season, and we even talked about, is this a wash now for A&M? Is their complete season a wash? Now, they lost to Arkansas, they lost to Mississippi State. That was kind of a letdown. But how do we feel about A&M so far? Now they beat Alabama. That's a big deal.
I am just shocked by this Alabama game. Again, after Texas A&M had lost to Arkansas and Mississippi State, they had barely snuck by Colorado, who was just an atrocious team earlier in the season. Everyone kind of had this game written off. Bama was looking like themselves. You know, as I was watching this game, I was thinking this is just going to be a classic Bama game where they don't play well, they don't look good, they don't deserve to win, but they just have so much talent and they're Alabama, so they end up getting the win. But credit A&M, they dominated this game. They were able to control the pace of the game as well as the line of scrimmage. I think Texas A&M's offensive line is why they won this game. They only allowed 4 tackles for losses. They gave up no sacks, and they only allowed 1 penalty to this Alabama scary defensive front. And I thought the Aggies' speed was just on full display in this game. If you remember in that game, Alabama was kind of coming back. I think they made it 31-24 on a blocked punt. Punt return for a touchdown. It ended up in the end zone. It looked like Alabama they were building their momentum. They were going to come back at that point. The ensuing kickoff, Devon Achane houses it, takes it to the house, keeps all of the momentum in that game on A&M's side. The Aggies just had an answer for everything Alabama threw at them, and just an uncharacteristic performance from Bama.
I mean, what a crazy game. Could you guys have imagined being there, rushing the field after? It's crazy. Well, let's talk about Zach Calzada, though. How do we?
He had the game of his
had
life.
3 touchdowns, 1 interception.
The game of his life, but this is a situation with Texas A&M. This is similar to Virginia Tech and North Carolina to begin the season. Remember when North Carolina, they were maybe a little overrated, but nonetheless, at the time, that was viewed as a big upset. You had Virginia Tech unranked. The spread was only 5, but a lot of people had already written off North Carolina as the coastal winner for this season. And then they lose at Virginia Tech to start the season. And now it's like, oh, maybe Virginia Tech's underrated. And a couple weeks later, they lose at West Virginia, who has yet to win a Big 12 game. So I think what's interesting is when you look at this game-per-game perspective, I am against that transitive property thing where if this team beats this team, that means they should win the rest of their games. I know Jalen has a different opinion. That's fine. I respect it. But the thing with Texas A&M is they had a great performance against Alabama. But at the same time, you could also look at Alabama and say, okay, but Alabama didn't look like themselves. We knew this was not going to be the same Alabama team this season as they usually have because they just lost way too much. It's different when you lose 1 or 2 receivers and a running back than when you lose 4 offensive linemen, 3 receivers, 2 running backs, a quarterback. It's different when you lose that much for one season, not over the course of 3 years. But A&M, it's not like you looked at this game and you saw 2 top 10 teams. You looked at this game and you saw 2 top 25 teams. But remember when A&M, the last time they beat Alabama was 2012 and they had Johnny Manziel. Those looked like 2 elite teams. That's not what we saw. We had a lot of sloppy play. We had a special teams touchdown, a lot of flags for Alabama. And when Alabama got into the red zone, they settled for field goals. And lo and behold, the one thing that does go right is Alabama's field goal kicking game. So I think what I take away from this game is, yes, Calzada is improving, A&M's improving, but it's not like Alabama's done, their dynasty is dead. It's not like A&M's going to go to the playoff. Remember, they still have 2 losses, and Alabama, despite losing head-to-head to A&M, is still ahead in the West Division of the SEC with the standings. I think Alabama's going to win out. I pray for anyone who has to play Alabama from this point forward. You know they're going to improve. That's the process for Nick Saban. And for A&M, they still have a lot of tricky games. Missouri tomorrow, coming off that Alabama high. Missouri, you know they're going to have a little bit of momentum coming off the UNT win. I know it's UNT, but it's still a little bit of momentum nonetheless. And they still have to play, A&M does, in Oxford against Ole Miss in that offense. And it's not that LSU is good, but if you look through the last several years, the one team that's had A&M's answer has been LSU. It's not the LSU factor this year. I think it's the Baton Rouge factor. They still have to travel to Baton Rouge. So if you look at the most difficult games, they're all on the road against Missouri, Ole Miss, and LSU. And they still have to play Auburn at home, and Auburn has yet to lose in College Station since the Aggies joined the SEC in 2012. So I think A&M's improving, but remember when I talked about them a month ago, I had them at 9-3. I'm going to stick with that prediction. I think they win every single game except for one. We'll see if that loss comes to Auburn or Ole Miss, but to me this is a 9-3 A&M team. A pretty good team, but not a great team.
what a story Zach Calzada is. Again, after Haynes King went down, and I mentioned the 2 losses, all those things kind of happened, and everyone just had this team and Zach Calzada really written off. And then he comes out and does this. If you remember in the 4th quarter of that Alabama game, he had a touchdown pass where he had his leg rolled up on pretty bad. It looked like it could have been a brutal injury. And then he comes back the next drive and leads the game-winning drive. It was just an outstanding performance from him. Just showed that he's a warrior. And I thought head coach Jimbo Fisher did a great job of moving the pocket around, giving him some looks outside the pocket, off play action and off of bootlegs. And I think that's why their offense had some big plays.
So that'll definitely be an SEC game to watch, A&M and Mizzou. But let's switch gears to the other big Texas game this past weekend, okay, the Red River rivalry. All right, OU came out and Lincoln Riley finally pulled Spencer Rattler. It's about time, personally. Caleb Williams comes out and he gives it to Texas. They just weren't expecting a mobile quarterback. That's not what they were expecting. So in my opinion on Texas, I don't think they're a bad team. I think that was the last thing that they were expecting last week. And what can you expect out of a Red River rivalry game? You can't expect anything else.
This was a total missed opportunity for Texas to get a huge win for Coach Sark in year 1. They led 28-7, and it was once again looking like Texas was just going to have their way, but it wasn't really that way at all. They just abandoned the run game, and which is done when you have Bijan Robinson, one of the best running backs in all the country. They just wasted a great game out of Bijan and out of their wide receiver Xavier Worthy. Imagine the questions that would have been answered for Texas had they won this game. Is Texas back? Yeah, probably, since they beat OU. Is Sarkisian the guy? Well, he beat OU in year 1, so yes, probably. Is Casey Thompson the guy? Again, he beat OU, so probably. Instead of answering questions within Texas's own program, they helped answer Oklahoma's quarterback questions, as you mentioned, with Caleb Williams. I think just an embarrassing effort from Texas in the second half of this game. Just a letdown performance and a huge missed opportunity.
Jalen, how do you feel about Texas's performance?
I would say, don't get me wrong, I do believe that Texas is back. I would say it's just like how Mizzou, just like how we outscore everybody in the second half. They got too comfortable. They got way too comfortable and stopped playing. Like, I believe Texas is one of those bigger schools. They're a little cocky. They got a little big-headed and just, like, let it go. They were like, oh, they're not going to come back. But then they had that quarterback switch up. Now the defense has to adjust to everything that was going on. And it's a huge adjustment that needs to be made, because now everything that you practice for is out the window, because now you have to prepare for different plays because they have a whole different quarterback and they don't know what type of scheme is coming out of this quarterback. So I believe that Texas is probably still going to be better than a lot of people think they are.
No, and I think that's going to be the case for a lot of opponents that face OU here on out, because I have a very, very good feeling that Caleb Williams might be starting for them this weekend. But back to Texas. I know I'm an OU girl. Sorry. Connor, I know you have some points on Texas.
Okay, so last weekend I actually sat on game day. Before I knew what the score was, I said, I don't care if Texas has a 3-score lead. I actually gave that as an example. I could have thrown out any number, but I said, I don't care if Texas has a 3-touchdown lead. I don't care if Oklahoma has a 3-touchdown lead. And those Red River rivalries, especially when they're high scoring like that, it's almost like basketball. You have momentum. You have a team like in basketball. A team can have a 12-point lead, and when you got 2 high-scoring offenses, the other team's going to come back and have a 10-2 run, and the next thing you know, they're in the game. Well, in these kinds of football games, a team can be up by 17, 20, 24 points, and the other team will come back and at least make it a game to where you're sitting on the couch in the fourth quarter and you're biting your fingernails because you're like, oh my gosh, how is this game even this close? That's what happens. I talked about this in A Block. When you get these 18 to 22-year-old kids and they're up by 21 points, their psyche is not going to be the same as it was in the first play. And it's not that it's disappointing, like to the perspective of, oh my gosh, they should play better. They shouldn't have a letdown here. They should be winning this game by 5 touchdowns because they were up by 3 touchdowns after the first quarter. That's not how life works. When you're up by 3 scores, it's been proven by human development science. You're not as focused when you have that kind of lead, and that's what happened in these kind of games. And when you have an Oklahoma team down, you keep kicking them. You don't wake a sleeping giant, and that sleeping giant, well, was Lincoln Riley's decision to pull Spencer Rattler and put in Caleb Williams. But you also have to think about, okay, yeah, for the defense, it's harder for them because now they're having to adjust to a different quarterback. But I don't care if you're up by 3 scores. You should find a way to at least pull out the game, win the game. But that's what happens in those kind of rivalry games. The game is not over until the clock hits 0. And I texted this in the group chat when Oklahoma was making this comeback. I don't care what the score is after the first quarter. I don't care after the second. I don't care after the third. Tell me when the game is over and how the game ended up, because that's what ultimately matters in those kind of games. When you got two really good offenses like that, and they can strike quick, the game is never over until the clock hits 0.
And that's totally right. But when we come back, we're going to shift gears back into Conference USA. We touched on some hot games last week, but there are some hot teams in our conference this season. Stay with us and we'll break down the standings that we think you're going to see at the end of the season. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for staying with us. I'm your host, Michelle Brooks, and once again, I'm joined by analysts Justin Ballou, Jalen Jackson, and Connor Hibbett. We're glad that you guys are here. Now, we're going to break down some conference standings for Conference USA this season. We have some teams making national news, specifically UTSA. I'm hot on UTSA. I have them at the top of their division right now. How do you feel about UTSA, Justin?
I love UTSA right now. I am so sold on the Roadrunners. Already bowl eligible. How about that? 6-0 for the Roadrunners. Their run game this season has just been so good that it has totally opened up their play action game and their long passing game, and that's just how they've been winning games with big plays. As we look at my standings for the end of the season, Conference USA has been so much fun so far, and I kind of see the West playing out as it stands right now. I have UTSA on the top with that great offense. They're playing Rice this weekend, so I like them to get to 7-0 on the season. They're already bowl eligible, like I said. They play at La Tech and against UAB later in the season. I think those two games for the Roadrunners will probably decide if they win the division or if UAB wins the division, who I have at second place. I think between UAB and UTSA, there's a big gap in the Western Division between them and everybody else. I gave the division to UTSA because UAB's offense is kind of one-dimensional right now with their running game, some quarterback controversy, quarterback questions there, and they struggle to play from behind. The Blazers do. So I'm confident in picking UTSA to come out of the West right now. Utep right now is 5-1. I'm not quite sold on this team yet because they haven't beaten anybody. Their wins this season, 5 wins, are a combined 5-23 on the year. And the one good team that they played, Boise State, they got obliterated. So I think it was 54-13, something in that range. So I'm not quite sold on Utep yet. We'll see how they perform over the next few weeks. To see if they can make some noise in the division. UNT, I have us finishing above Southern Miss and Rice. I still think we're good enough on offense to still be above those teams, but I don't see us competing with the top dogs in the West Division this year. The East Division, I think, is going to be the more fun division because there are a ton of good teams right now in this division. I can kind of see it going either way. Charlotte's actually on top right now, but I have Western Kentucky ultimately coming out of this division. I love their quarterback, Bailey Zappi. He's been having an outstanding season. Their next 5 games are at Old Dominion, at FIU, against Charlotte and Middle Tennessee State at home, and then at Rice. So good chance to get to 5-1 in conference play there for Western Kentucky. Everything is in front of them. They're 0-1 right now in conference, but I do not expect that to continue at all. FAU, I have second in the division. When all is said and done, I put them over Charlotte just because I think FAU's defense is better, but I think FAU Charlotte could be switched in my book. And at the bottom of the division, FIU and Old Dominion, they just have brutal schedules over the next few weeks. They have some winnable games at the end of the year, but with these tough teams coming up, I just think they're going to be beat up by the time they get to later in the season and get those winnable games.
So my question is, because it looks like the West is very top heavy compared to the East. I know you just said there's a lot of good teams swirling in the East, but the West is going to be a lot better than the East. How do you feel about the East? What is your breakdown, Connor, of the East right now?
East Division, I agree with Justin. I think it's Western Kentucky. I was high on Western Kentucky to begin the season, and I still am. Bailey Zappi is one of my favorite quarterbacks in the country. He's a baller, man. He doesn't have that great of a defense this season, unfortunately. This is the first time that Western Kentucky hasn't had a good defense in several years, which is unfortunate because they had a good defense. They would at least have a better record than they do right now. They're 1-4 right now. Don't let that record fool you. They've lost to Army, Michigan State, Indiana, and UTSA.
They played all those teams well, I want to mention.
Yes, they played all of them well. And arguably, they gave Michigan State their best game all season. And Michigan State's currently ranked 10th, and they're undefeated. They got a big game against Indiana. We'll discuss that later in the show. But I think Western Kentucky is the best team in the East by a good bit. I know some people were high on Marshall coming into the season, but I talked about them a month ago. I thought they were a little bit of fool's gold last year with who they beat and how they looked against the better competition that they faced later on. They lose a lot of players to the transfer portal. They lose their head coach, lose their offensive defensive coordinator. So it just wasn't, to me, shaping up to be as good of a year as some people were projecting. Now, Marshall's still a pretty good team. The East Division, to me, it's Western Kentucky and everybody else. And I think FIU and Old Dominion at the bottom, they're just not that good right now. And they haven't been good for quite some time. And Butch Davis, the head coach at FIU, his tenure might be coming to an end. He might be retiring soon. The West Division, Michelle, you mentioned it. It's very, very top-heavy. I like UTSA to come out of the West Division because they play UAB at home. UAB is not the best road team. They are much more difficult to beat at home, UAB is. But because UTSA plays them at home, I think that's going to be enough for UTSA to finish on top of the West Division. I got UAB finishing second, Louisiana Tech finishing third. But the situation with a lot of the Texas teams with UNT and Utep and Rice, I think it's going to come down to where the game is being played, who's coming off of what game. I like I like us to still beat Utep at home. I believe that's our homecoming date. Utep, Justin mentioned it, they haven't really played anyone good. In fact, I remember sitting on the show a month ago and I said I thought Utep could start the season off pretty well because of their strength of schedule. But don't let that fool you. They are not as good as their record would showcase, but they're improved. This is not the Utep of 3 years ago that you could just run over and it's basically a bye week. They're improved, but they're not a great team. They're not impossible to beat despite being 5-1. Justin said they're one good team they faced, they got obliterated. But again, the Miners are coming from the underground. They're improving. But Southern Miss, I've got finishing last in the West Division. They're struggling right now, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of positive vibes going on in the program. They have a new coach, so I think getting some time to get the new soil settled in, if you will, to get that foundation settled at Southern Miss, they'll need a couple of years right now. And you got to think about this is the super senior season, and Southern Miss didn't really have a whole lot of depth coming into this year to begin with, so they were kind of already starting on a lower pedigree than most teams coming into this season. But the West Division is very, very top-heavy.
So if you look at all of our Western Division standings, we all have about the same top three. But Jalen, you have someone in your top 4 spot that I have some questions about. Rice. Do you want to talk to us about why you have Rice up here above UNT even?
I believe Rice. Okay, so beginning off the season, they didn't have the same kind of schedule that everybody else did. But I believe that they have a little bit more promise than Southern Miss and UNT, just because of they'll be able to build up as they go on. They actually have a lot of seniors as well, so they have a lot of returners. They will be able to progress better than better than Southern Miss and UNT. We haven't been able to fare too well, but I have a little faith in Rice for some reason. I don't know.
You're just hot on Rice.
Yeah. It's hard to place those teams at the bottom of the division. I think it ultimately come down to head-to-heads and probably at the top 2 with who ends up coming out of the division. It's hard to predict a UNT Rice game, for example, late in the season, because you don't know where the teams are going to be at that point if everything goes according to how we expect it to. But it's kind of easier to pick who's going to come out on top because you've seen them playing well versus picking the bottom.
And Rice has even beat us the past 2 years. So I don't know. I feel like that is going to continue. That's why they're even over us, and I feel like they'll beat Southern Miss as well.
Alrighty, and we just see UNT finishing halfway, all of us.
I could see us finishing above Utep. If we beat them in a head-to-head, I think we could finish above them. They have the upper hand in conference right now with their wins in conference already, but ultimately I could see us maybe finishing 4th in the best possible scenario, but I do not see us finishing above La Tech. Obviously, we already lost to them, and UAB and UTSA I think will probably be a blowout later in the season at this point with how the Roadrunners are looking.
I feel like that season can be turned around though. Like ours is UNT. Just if they can play the whole game how they do in the second half, that is our big issue. Play in the beginning, play all 4 quarters. We give up. I mean, we don't give up because we lose the first half. We go all the way through the first half, just trying, and then the second half we come out like a whole different team. We need to do that from the beginning.
Well, the question of how UNT will finish is kind of dependent on how we play tonight. It's Friday Night Lights here in North Texas, and we're going to preview the game against Marshall when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Mean Green Game Day. Now, it is Friday Night Lights tonight in North Texas, and it couldn't get more Texas football than that. It's the first Friday night game for UNT ever. These two teams tonight were meeting Marshall at Apogee. It's the fourth time they've met ever in history. The last time we took them on was 5 years ago in 2016. We came out with the win then. Previously, it was a long time ago. We played them in 1988. They beat us, and then they beat us again in 2015. So we're coming out against Marshall. Y'all are favoring Marshall a little bit tonight. I'm excited to see how UNT plays. Let's preview this, Justin.
I'm excited to see how UNT plays too tonight because the Mean Green are getting the Conference USA East Division winners from last year who were expected to win conference last year. We're getting them on a short week at home. There's really no excuse to lose this game just given how Marshall has played this year. I think this is a big game for recruiting tonight because with us being a small group of 5 school that hasn't had a lot of success, we don't get a ton of nationally televised games. This is our only one tonight on CBS Sports Network, and it's a big one for recruits to see us on national television and hopefully see us play well. So I think it's a big one tonight.
I think Marshall's been a decent team. I think they're the definition of a decent team. They're a team that can compete against upper echelon teams for an extended period of time, but they're not a good team because they don't. A good team is not 3-3. A good team would be at least 4-2, depending on their strength of schedule. Marshall's strength of schedule has not been terrific, to say the least, like Western Kentucky has been, like their schedule has been. I think this is a game that UNT can win. Justin and I actually talked about right before the season started. The first several games, we knew we were going to win game 1, but after that, we were looking ahead and we're like, okay, what game do you think is the most winnable? And we both agreed it was going to be Marshall, and here we are sitting on game day. We think of those last several games, this is our best chance to win. Like Justin said, they're coming off a short week. If you've noticed something, I mean, not just this season, I don't care the year, you name it, the weeknight games in college football particularly, they're always weird. Like, sometimes the team who you think will win, they win, but it's the way that it happens, the how factor, not the what, not who wins or loses, it's how it happens. There's going to be a turnover on special teams. Someone's going to muff a punt. There's going to be 15 penalties. There's going to be 8 turnovers combined. Something is going to be weird because you get 18 to 22-year-olds who have to go to class, and now you get them on the short week, not as much time of preparation. Who knows what their mindset's going to be like coming into the game. It's going to be weird in some kind of way. Weeknight games are usually weird.
I totally agree with that, and you always see upsets on Friday night games. Like you mentioned, it's because the fact that these guys are college kids, they have class probably on Thursday or the Wednesday before the game, and then they're traveling on Thursday. It kind of impacts their week, changes things, and college kids aren't used to doing that versus like an NFL where it's kind of different because you're used to playing all the time and playing on short weeks. It's not like that in college, so I agree with you, Connor, 100%. This is totally a game that we can win just because of the fact that it's at home on a Friday night. If we were playing at Marshall and it was a Friday night, I think we would have been a much bigger underdog and would have had a lot less of a chance to win this game. But since it's at home, Marshall on a short week coming in here, I think we have a good chance.
Well, Marshall's coming off of an overtime win against Old Dominion, 20-13. That's a close game, and maybe a game that they probably weren't expecting to be that close. We just talked about how all of us have Old Dominion finishing low. You know, Jalen, how do you think that this overtime win affects Marshall coming into UNT this week?
Well, I believe that this overtime win, they'll be a little more focused than normal. Maybe because they lost to a team they won, but in overtime they went that far with the team that's not very good. They're decent at most. But I believe that they'll have to put in much more focus on both offense and defense, and especially because Grant Wells, he's a great quarterback, but he has vision issues as well. So he's thrown 9 interceptions, threw 8 touchdowns. You have to get it together. It's more of a tighten up type of deal.
It was a disappointing performance last week for Marshall, and it's really just been a disappointing season for them overall. I really had high expectations for them coming into the season. If you remember last show, I talked about Grant Wells being my CUSA player to watch. He's kind of been a disappointment too. He was expected to take a pretty big jump from last year after they went to the conference title game, won the East Division. He struggled with turnovers this year. He's already got 9 interceptions, which is more interceptions than touchdowns. He only has 8 touchdown passes. He's thrown for 2,000 yards, which is great, but he only has a 48.5 QBR. You mentioned vision issues. That's what it kind of boils down to him with. He's not seeing the open guys, and when he is, he's late on throws and he's throwing it to defenders. So an opportunity for our defense tonight.
And with the new coaching staff that Marshall has, they're putting the game in Grant Wells' hands. Last season, it was the running game, the offensive line. They lost a few guys off that offensive line. They lost their running back. So now with the new coaching staff, it's now Grant Wells. The game's going to be on your shoulders. And he was a game manager last year. He did what he had to in those last few games. When they played better defenses that were able to stop the running game, we saw how Marshall struggled late in the season last year. So I was wondering how Grant Wells was going to do this season. He's performed well at times, and it's kind of like if you go up to bat 100 times, you're going to get some hits. Well, when Marshall puts the game in his hands, he's going to make some plays because he has the ball in his hands all the time. But at the same time, if he's not a great quarterback, he's not going to be consistent. So you're going to see mishaps from him, and we've seen that this year. He's thrown 8 touchdowns, 9 interceptions.
Right.
Because of the new coaching staff, and I don't think Grant Wells fits in well with the scheme, I think Marshall is vulnerable. And I think UNT with an improving defense, we talked about that, and with an offense coming off of a good second half performance off of Missouri, the psyche, I think, is there at least on the field. I think with the Friday night, weeknight weirdness of college football, I think it's primed to be a pretty good game.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that new coaching staff that they have, because they are the number 2 scoring offense in Conference USA, but they didn't touch the end zone in any of their first 10 possessions last week, and they touched 9 different receivers touched the ball. So they're just sharing the ball over the field, which in my opinion shows more that they're not confident in anyone consistently enough. I think if UNT attacks them in that way and takes away all those different options, they could be struggling.
Just
if they
try to
touch
confuse
nine receivers in a win,
I think it's a lack of confidence in Grant Wells, honestly, with his coaching staff. They're not letting him throw the ball downfield nearly as much as he was last year. You mentioned, Connor, with him being a game manager. Their run game was so good last year that it totally opened up their play action and their long game. That's not really the case this year. It's a lot of short, quick passes, short screen passes to get guys open, like you said, spreading the wealth around. One guy I will say that we need to watch out for, their wide receiver, Corey Gammage. Grant Wells likes to spread the ball around, but Gammage is Wells' safety blanket, and he's his go-to guy, and has been over the past 2 seasons. Gammage has 38 receptions already this season, 515 yards, averages over 13 yards a catch, and has a 49-yard catch already on the season. So he has pretty good numbers, but he's still itching to find the end zone. Hasn't found the end zone yet, so maybe could get one tonight. I'm looking for how our secondary matches up against him. He's a guy that gets a ton of yards after the catch. So when he has the ball in his hands, I want to see our defense rallying defenders to the ball to try to bring him down. He'll do a ton of damage with the ball in his hands.
And one thing I love about this matchup is our ability to rush the passer with just our defensive line. We have a lot of underclassmen that can rush the passer really well, so we're going to enjoy these guys for the next few years for us. But I think if we are able to bring 3 to 4 guys and get pressure on Grant Wells, drop 7, 8 at times, I think that would be huge for us in this game. And at least keep Grant Wells on his toes and keep everything in front of us. Make him, over the course of the game, keep hitting his check down, because the way life works, and when you love to be aggressive, you don't like to settle with things, and so for a quarterback, they're going to want to hit the big throw. They're not going to keep wanting to throw it underneath. If UNT forces the underneath pass time and time again, it'll make Grant Wells frustrated, because he's going to want to hit the big throw, and that's when UNT can jump on it and force a turnover. Our ability to rush the passer with 3 to 4 guys, drop 7 to 8 in coverage, I think is going to be the key thing for us tonight.
Jalen, do you have a key to the game that you think, besides attacking Grant Wells, that UNT needs tonight?
Well, I believe that us playing, trying to guard up against Grant Wells is not the biggest thing tonight. I feel like our biggest thing tonight will be to try to score on offense, because I have a key player, and it is Abraham Boakland, and he is actually leading CUSA in tackles right now. And then the second behind him is Eli Neal, and he's second. They have the top 2 leading tackles in CUSA. So I believe that'll bring DeAndre Torrey some problems, even trying to run the ball, because he's sitting at, I believe, the first in CUSA rushing. And that's going to bring a big issue, just trying to run the ball, and they'll be in the backfield trying to sack Austin Awney. And so I believe that they'll have to adjust very well to that, because they have 2 dogs in their front 7 just going to be in the backfield probably every play.
Yeah, those 2 are a great duo at linebacker, but I want to hop back to what Connor said. This is a Marshall team that last year obviously had so much high expectations. This is a game that we can get them. It really is. We're like 11-point underdogs, but I think we can get them tonight. I really do. You mentioned Abraham Beauplan as the linebacker. Eli Neal is second on the team in tackles. He was second on the team last year in tackles. He's got 49 this year. He's got 4 sacks. Abraham Beauplan has 2 sacks. That is a great linebacker duo that we're really going to have to go against. And as far as our defensive scheme, I wish it was as simple as rushing through guys and getting pressure. We haven't been doing that this year, so that is not what we can do on this defense at all. Because what it does when our rush defense is as bad as it is, when we rush 3 players, that totally opens up the offensive line for them to have gaps to run through. So I don't think we can rush three guys at all and be successful in this game. I expect us to be blitzing a lot to try to contain a Grant Wells in the pocket as well as their run game.
Well, you're going to get our full prediction on who we think might pull out the win tonight. I know you kind of have some ideas already, but stick around, because we're going to give you a lot more insight to some other big games this weekend too. Stay with us. Welcome back to Mean Green Game Day. I'm your host, Michelle Brooks, and this is your analysts, Justin Ballou, Jalen Jackson, and Connor Hibbett. We are so glad that you guys have stayed with us throughout the show, but it's time for the favorite time of the show, predictions. We're predicting a couple big games this week. Off the bat, OSU versus Texas. Now, we talked about Texas a lot earlier, and I think that this is going to be a good game. But OSU's D, I think, is what's going to make it hard for Texas. They are getting a lot of third down stops, they're controlling the backfield, and they're giving a lot of pass protection. After last week, I'm still confident in Casey Thompson, but I think it's going to be a tough game for the Longhorns. I have to go with the Longhorns.
Yeah, I'm going with the Longhorns as well. Oklahoma State is 6-0, and they've looked really good so far, but I don't think they've seen an offense up to Texas's caliber yet. They definitely have not seen a ground game as good as Texas has with Bijan Robinson. They're 6-0, the Cowboys are, but their largest margin of victory was only 11 points over Kansas State. And that might not seem that bad, but they've played Missouri State and Tulsa, and both those teams kept it pretty close. Texas obviously coming off the emotional loss against Oklahoma. This is a great opportunity for them to get back on track at home. Texas still has a hard road in front of them. They're at Baylor, they're at Iowa State, and they're at West Virginia later in the season. I think at this point their goal is to get another shot at Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. This is a game they better win with that upcoming schedule.
You know, me personally, I'm still going to go with what I said earlier. Texas is back. Do not sleep on Texas. I'm going to go with Texas as well. I believe that Texas, they have competition that's coming up, but I believe that they will pass. If they lose any more games, I believe it'll only be one. They're playing away, but I believe that they're still Texas. They're going to go through and they're going to overcome the adversity.
What I didn't understand coming into the season was that some people had Oklahoma State like finishing second and third to last in conference because they disappointed last year, lost a couple of big name players. What they did not understand about Oklahoma State was that they have one of the most underrated defenses coming into the season. I talked about them in my preview of the season. I thought they were probably the most underrated unit in the country coming into the season, and I think they lived up to that billing. The problem with Oklahoma State for the first time under Mike Gundy is their offense. Spencer Sanders, the Oklahoma State quarterback, has had problems with turnovers. The only issue for me with Texas in this game is coming off the emotional game last weekend. I would not be surprised to see Oklahoma State start off quick, like 10-14-0, but I do think Texas finds a way to win at home and hands Oklahoma State their first loss of the season. Close game, though.
Close game, but it's going to be a real good one. Another good game of the week, but maybe an obvious pick for a lot of people, is Georgia versus Kentucky. Now, Georgia is dominating defensively. They're explosive offensively. They're number one for a reason. I think we can all agree. But Kentucky's been improving. I like Kentucky a lot. I think that they can come in and give Georgia a little bit of a hard time, but I'm confident that Georgia's going to come out on top today.
Yeah, Mark Stoops is building something very special at Kentucky. You know, when you think Kentucky, you think basketball, but that's really not the case now with Mark Stoops. Very slowly building this Kentucky program into what it is now. That being said, I think Georgia is still the best team in the country. I think Kentucky is probably the clear-cut second team in the SEC East behind Georgia right now. But Georgia's defense is just too scary to go against this Kentucky offense. Kentucky hasn't seen a defense quite like Georgia yet. As South Carolina coach Shane Beamer said, Georgia has like 100 five-star guys just on their defense alone. So I think they're going to ride their defense, and this is going to be a tough game for Kentucky. Give me Georgia.
Well, Georgia, their defense is just immaculate. That's the word I'm going to use for Georgia's defense. Immaculate. Sitting at number one. I believe Kentucky is coming up, just slowly, just building up, but they are not of that caliber yet. They will get there eventually, but I don't believe that they're there yet. So I'm going to go with Georgia.
I'm going to go with Georgia. I think the question is, the spread right now is about 22. Do you think Kentucky covers that? Do y'all think that?
I think they can keep it close in the first half, but I think it'll be a blowout.
Okay, yeah, so it's kind of similar to Auburn, how Auburn kind of were staying with Georgia for a little while, and then Georgia pulled away. So, yeah, I agree with Justin there. I could see that similar fashion. Now, Kentucky's not going to back down. I'm going to use a Florida Tom Petty term. They're not going to back down here. But I think Kentucky stays with Georgia for a little while. They're a physical team. They're easily, by far, the second most physical team in the SEC East behind Georgia. Now, I do have to disagree with Justin on one thing you said. I don't think Kentucky's the clear-cut second-best team, though, in the SEC East. I think if they were to play Florida another few times, I do think Florida would win probably the majority of those games. If they were to play a best of three, Florida would win at least two of them. I'll go with Georgia in this game.
Okay, well, that was kind of an obvious round of picks, I'm not going to lie. But this next game has a split right down the middle. Michigan State versus Indiana. Now, I think this game could go either way. Indiana, Indiana looks really good. They've got a lot of third down stops on D, but I'm kind of hot on Michigan State for this game. I think that they're going to pull out the win. I think that Indiana has some questions offensively that they need to look into. I got Michigan State.
Indiana was a team that had really high expectations coming into the season, and now suddenly they're 2-3. They don't look great. Everybody's just writing them off, and I say proceed with caution with Indiana. Their quarterback, Michael Penix Jr., other than the turnovers this year, has been pretty good. He's really struggled with interceptions. But other than that, I think Indiana can get them this week. I'm going to take Indiana. They're on home turf this week. They get a top 10 team. Michigan State has Michigan next week, while Indiana is at Ohio State. I don't think Indiana is a 2-5 team. They're 2-3 right now. If they lose the next two, they'd be 2-5. I don't think they're that bad, so I'm going to take Indiana in this game.
Well, with Michigan State playing Michigan next week, I feel like they have something to prove this week as to, just to show Michigan that, oh, we're not the little brother team. So I'm definitely going to go with Michigan State due to the fact that Indiana is not looking like such a good team. Even the fact of, I'm going to go with the transitive property, they almost lost to Western Kentucky. And I'm not with it. I'm not at all. I'm definitely going to go with Michigan State.
I'm going to go with Indiana in the upset. I agree with Justin on his philosophy here. This time I'm going to agree with you, Justin. So I'm going to come back and give you credit here. I don't want to be negative. I want to be positive. Yeah, Indiana is not a 2-5 team. They are better. And the thing is, this is another Virginia Tech, North Carolina situation. How good is Michigan State? Because they beat overrated teams early on in the season that we viewed at the time being upsets with Northwestern and Miami. But looking back at it, Michigan State's just a clear-cut better team, and Northwestern and Miami have disappointed to a big degree this season. So Michigan State, are they improving under Mel Tucker? Obviously, yeah. You can't be undefeated 6-0, sitting at number 10 and not be pretty good. I just don't think they are a legit top 10 team that's going to stay like that for the rest of the season. Look at the Big Ten East, for example. And I think Indiana, again, they're better than their record suggests. They've lost to Penn State. They lost to Cincinnati, lost to Iowa, two of those games being on the road. Close game. I could see like a 24-21 kind of score, but give me the Hoosiers in a minor upset.
Alrighty, well, this will be an interesting game to watch. Now, games to watch in the conference. Conference USA, we've got Utep versus Louisiana Tech. Now, we were talking about this earlier. UTEP's 5-1. That's the best they've been since 2016. They're 2-0 in conference play, the best since 2008. I'm a UTEP girl. My parents went there. I was born in El Paso. I grew up with their kicker, Gavin Beckley. They are a good team, and they're a team to watch. They're coming up, and they haven't had a season like this in a while. Louisiana Tech's going to give them some trouble, but it's in El Paso. I got UTEP.
Louisiana Tech fans have just been on an absolute roller coaster of emotions this season. Their first 5 games, these are the results. They blew a 34-14 lead in week 1 against Mississippi State. Should have won the game, lost 35-34, 1 point. Next week, they sneak out against Southeast Louisiana, by 3 points. Then the next week, they lose to SMU on a Hail Mary, another game they should have won. Then they allowed 17 straight points to us in that game. Maybe should have lost that game. Then last game, they went toe-to-toe with NC State and only lost by 7 points. This has been a very competitive team for 2 and 3. And I think everyone in Ruston this week just had a week to catch their week on the bye week, so I'm going to go with Louisiana Tech.
Well, I'm going to go with Louisiana Tech as well. I don't believe that, just like how we said earlier, UTEP has had the easiest schedule out of anybody in Conference USA to start off. I don't believe that once they come into the game with Louisiana Tech, they're going to be a little flustered because they've played easier teams, except for the one loss they do have. So.
All right. Well, real quick, Connor, who do you have for this game?
Big home game for UTEP, but I'm going to go with Louisiana Tech, and I think they cover the touchdown spread.
Okay, well, you can catch UNT tonight here at Apogee for this game. UNT versus Marshall, first Friday night game for UNT ever. I've got UNT because this is Mean Green Game Day, guys. Come on. It's UNT.
I'm just not confident that our defense, given what we've seen the last few weeks, can contain this offense. I think we could upset them, but I'm going to take Marshall to ultimately win today.
See, I'm going to take Marshall as well, only due to the fact that I don't think this offense is going to be able to pull it together for this amazing defense, those 2 linebackers that we brought up earlier.
If UNT were to upset someone this season, it would be Marshall, but I'm going to go with Marshall.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens tonight at Apogee at 6. Thanks for joining us. This game will be on TV tonight. How exciting. CBS Sports, you can catch it there. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week for another home game and hopefully a little bit better of a season.